Okay, our last power tier lich of the bunch. These are our Hypercarries. You'll notice again I got rid of the viable tier. That is because Hypercarries, by definition, are strong units. These are units you want to build your team around, right? If you're going to play one of them, the team kind of becomes all about them. Now, granted, the exception, no, there's not an exception. Hypercarries tend to generate an enormous amount of your team's damage, and they also tend to benefit from a lot of different stats, more so than other units. Part of the reason these units are here is because they can scale in so many ways. They also can benefit very well from horizontal investments, meaning that your team buffs, when funneled into them, are very effective. And they can also, in addition, benefit from vertical investments, as some of them have really strong constellations. Now, granted, hypercarries are rarely meta, and the reason is that they require a lot to come online. But once they're online, they're spectacular. Um, and again, with the exception of Xiangling, they're all unfielders, so you can only have one at a time. So this role is very, very competitive and competes with drivers. So um, it's very, very crowded because you only get one out of the four slots, and there's probably 20 units competing for that slot. Our one exception is our first unit, who has been meta for years, but I think she's a little out of meta right now because of the rise of Dendro, and Hydro is Xiangling. Xiangling is the only 4-star hyper carry, and she is also the only sub DPS hyper carry. And that's because there are a number of teams, mainly national team and all its variants, including Raiden National and International with Tartaglia. And in those situations, Xiangling is the biggest damage dealer. And that's because she just does tons of damage. The reason she does tons of damage is because she snapshots the buff at the time of casting a Pyronado. So what you do is you stack all your buffs up, Xiangling ults, and all those buffs stay with the ult as it's being cast. Because of that, she's often paired with Bennett, because she benefits from his attack. Um, she's very energy hungry, so she requires a lot of ER. And again, that's why she's paired with Bennett and or Raiden. On top of that, why she's in this category is Xiangling has very good constellations, in turn including C4 and C6, which one increases the Pyronado duration and one increases pyro damage. So those are incredible. And then on top of that, she scales on stats. She makes good use of crit stats. She makes good use of attack stats. She makes good use of elemental mastery. She makes good use of energy recharge. You can kind of assemble your Xiangling in almost any way, as long as you just stack as many stats on her as possible. And then Pyronado will truck everything. That's really impressive. Um, I want to put her here, but she's fallen a little out of the meta because um, burning is not so good, so she doesn't work with Dendro teams. And now with Dendro teams, other sub DPSs are just more accessible. But a high investment Xiangling does a ton of damage. Xiao, one of Genshin's poster childs, he keeps getting buffs indirectly. Xiao has already been very stat hungry for a long time. He wants off-field healing, so we used to run him with Jean. But now he has Xianyue, and her heal plus plunge buffs are amazing for him. Xiao and Xianyue is very strong. Farazan's very strong. He's gotten some new artifact sets. I don't think he's meta defining. I don't think he's as strong as Xiangling. but he's come a long way from where he was. He's still a very, very strong unit, and if you're a Xiao fan, you should play him, you should build him. It'll work. But I just think that Animo DPS is a bit weaker than some other elements, and that's why he doesn't get as busted. Hu Tao. Hu Tao, one of Genshin poster child. She's phenomenally strong, as I talked about in video 1. Hu Tao will benefit from almost every stat. Attack is great, crit is great, HP is great, elemental mastery is great. She just doesn't care about defense or energy recharge. She benefits from having an incredible weapon. She benefits from a great Constellation 1. She benefits really well from party buffs and horizontal investment as well. So Hu Tao, I think objectively, in my opinion, one of the strongest units in the game, but she requires a good amount to access that power. Also, her teams are kind of narrow. She's also greedy in that her strongest team is Yelan, Xingqiu, and Kazuha. So she's going to here three of your strongest supports in one team. So she can sometimes limit you in team building for the Abyss. I think those are downsides. I think her weakness is how narrow she is. She also could run Zhongli or double Geo. Those are completely fine with her as well in the old Walnut team comps. I actually think Hu Tao's good with a C6 Kaya for melt, reverse melt. But because there's only a few units she really works with great, and those are her very premier units you might want to use in your other team. She's a bit narrower, but I think her power level is obscene. I think she's crazy good. Eula, outside of other considerations, as a unit's very strong. Her numbers are huge. A problem is she's a physical Claymore user. And as we've said, Claymores don't have the world's greatest weapon. So if you're getting her, you want Song of Broken Pines. So you need her weapon too. Physical damage is not great. You probably want to have specifically, I don't know, Kazuha, Fischl, and Mika, for example. You want to run double cryo. You want to electro sub DPS. The reason why I said Kazuha is to group units. Like, you have to put all these things together. And then I think my understanding, not only owning Eula myself, is that a lot of her power is also gated behind constellations. But her constellations are some of the strongest in the game. So I think if you meet all those many requirements, she's completely insane. But that is a lot of investment required to get there. You need a very specific team, very specific weapon, maybe some constellations on a premium 5-star, and then she's good. So I think she's a step down from Hu Tao and Xiangling because it is so hard to access her power. But by no means is she weak. She's very strong. I think in contrast to the other units, Ayaka's a bit easier because you're going to run double cryo. You don't need to build a ton of crit stats. You stack crit damage. Stat-wise, she's easier. She has Aminoma Kageyuchi. Her 4-star weapon is pretty good. Miss Splitter is spectacular. Her teams, she's restricted to freeze teams, so you're going to want to run 1 Animo, 1 Cryo, 1 Hydro with her. I've done her with Furina, Charlotte, Kazuha. That's great. You can run her with Shenhe specifically to really bring out her power. Her best team has long been Shenhe, Kokomi, Kazuha. So her personal power is not as hard to access as the other Hypercarries, but when your best team is 3 other premium units and they all want their weapons too, I guess not Kokomi. So say if I want a good Ayaka team, I need 4 premium characters, 3 premium weapons. And that's just a lot to ask for one unit. But that said, I think she's completely busted. She is spectacular, and she goes here. Um, in contrast to the other units, Raiden is more flexible. Raiden energy batteries your whole team, which gives her some supportive capabilities. She has off-field damage, which gives her some sub-DPS capabilities. She can drive other reactions, which gives her some driver capabilities. Her C2 shreds armor, so she becomes very, very strong personal DPS. You can run her in Overload, Overvape, Spread, Aggravate, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, any sort of thing. And she's just a phenomenal unit, tons of power. I think, though, she is very stat hungry. You want a ton of energy recharge, and you also want crit stats. You also want attack stats. And she also scales very well with horizontal investment. For example, she uses Bennett's buff really well. She uses Yelan's buff really well. So in that sense, Raiden is a hyper carry in that she wants the team built around her. But unlike these other hyper carries, she also gives back to the team. That's why she's meta defining. She's just as powerful, but she also buffs your team up, and she's also more flexible. I think Raiden's completely insane unit, even at C0. No, I think C2 is overvalued, even though it is very good. Okay, moving on, we have Ito. Ito, I love Ito in events. I think he's hilarious. He's one of the most fun characters out there. He's great. That said, he is a defense scaling Geo Claymore hyper carry. So Claymores aren't great carries, and Geo is not a great element right now. So he's a little weaker because of that. Unlike Navia, I think he does want constellations more. I think that also Goro is really important for him. He wants a high constellation Goro. Right, and then you're going to want a third Geo unit. Either, I would say that Albedo before, but now Chiori is great with Ito. So if I run Chiori, Ito, Goro, C6 Goro, that's already a lot of investment. And then I can put in something in the last slot. Any sub DPS, maybe a Furina, if Goro's healing's enough to get her buffs up. So he needs a good amount of vertical investment, also added by the fact that defense Claymores, it's the Redhorn Stone Thrasher or nothing. Like, Beacon of the Reed Sea is far weaker because there's no defense on it. And then if I'm running a crit weapon, run Serpent Spine, no defense on that. White Blind has no crit stats. So he just needs a lot to access. He's strong, but not as strong as the others. Moving on right now, we have Cyno. Cyno's an Electro DPS hyper carry, but he has very long rotation time, so that really limits what you can use him with. You basically need to run Nahida Shincho, and maybe a healer, maybe a Kuki or a Baiju or something like that. So his parties are very limited because most buffs run out before he finishes his birth window. In addition, he's just kind of inflexible, and I don't think his damage is as high as Raiden's. So he's just clearly not as strong as she is. That said, his playstyle is really fun, kind of cool. If you like Anubis, go for it. Wanderer and Xiao are kind of similar. They want some of the same teams. So Wanderer doesn't want Xianyue, but Wanderer will want to run with Farzan as well. And then could run Bennett Jean, but I know he needs a shield. So I want to run something with a shield that buffs him as well. So his problem again is the team comps are very limited. He kind of has to have a C6 Farazan to be valid. And I don't know what shielder I'd pick to run with him, quite honestly. But I guess he could also be a driver. I could run Xingqiu for the interrupt resist, and then maybe like official or something. But all that said, it's a very limited situation. I think he's super fun. Again, really interesting character as a person. Just not as strong as the top tier units. Um, Al Haytham, he's a Dendro Hypercarry. He double dips into EM, so EM quadratic scaling. This makes him easier to build. He also likes the attack stats. He also likes the crit stats, but you want a lot of EM on him. You want a good amount of crit. Dendro means he's more flexible. You can run him with any Hydros units. Yelan, Xingqiu, Kokomi, Fiorina, all good. You're going to want Nahida, but you could also run him with Yao Yao, Baiju, Dendro Traveler even. You could also run him in a Hyper Bloom team. Well, you want Electro in there, right? So you could run him with Official. You could run him with the Yai. You could run him, with any sorts of number of things. And I think that's the point. Al Haytham is more flexible than the rest of these units. So he's kind of like Raiden in that, and that's why people with Al Haytham use him. You don't need as specific of a situation. So what you'll notice about these units is, first of all, with the exception of these two, they need very, very specific situations to flourish. And then secondly, those are specifically high investment situations. So their use cases are narrow, which is why I think the meta has moved away from hypercarries. Their power is harder to access. But that said, I think in those appropriate situations, all these units are incredibly strong. Even if I say, like, I don't know, say I think Ito or Sino are the weakest of this set. Well, someone will show up with a well-built C2 Ito and do a bazillion damage with him, right? So even the weaker units are flourishing with the right investment. So I think that's kind of cool. Hypercarry teams are fun, but they're less accessible. Whereas if I build off a driver and sub DPS, I just need less investment to come online. Okay, though, that's it for our 5 tier lists plus the intro, so that's 6 videos. If you watched the whole thing, thank you. It's been quite fun making these. I've been meaning to do it for a long time. I don't know. Leave some questions in the comments. See you all.